It's fine. Okay, let's get started with the questions. Emily, are you ready?
Sure.
Yeah. So you had so many great accomplishments in your career journey. Can you share with us briefly, your career journey briefly and what got you to where you are today?
Yeah, since there's so many Simon people, I started in Rochester undergrad in biology and minored in engineering. I was pre-med. And then I realized the thing that drew me to medicine was probably going to prohibit me from being successful because I really was drawn to taking care of hurt children. And I realized I have no emotional distance, which also led to the spare room. And, it's a good learning, which is sometimes the thing that you're really passionate about doesn't have to be your full-time job. You can invest, the other parts of your life equally in the things that really matter to you. And so not really knowing what I was going to do, walking away from a tough situation with a little baby that I had actually deferred med school to go adopt. Very long story, very short. I thought, what am I going to do with my life? But I'd been enrolled in an MD MBA program elsewhere. And I thought, well, maybe I should go back to University of Rochester because that's where I did my undergrad, and applied for a finance degree because I'd always been science and I thought finance made sense. That's the only reason I ended up at Simon. I didn't know anything about business or finance or strategy, but it was a great opportunity to pivot and learn something new. I was recruited by Procter Gamble for an internship in finance, actually, but very quickly they suggested that because of my interest, my curiosity, that I might be suited to brand management. So that's how I started at P&G, and I was there for 11 years. And when you join P&G, as with many companies, they ask a question up front, which is, what are your career aspirations? And for somebody like me at that point, I had no idea. I didn't even know anything about business. I didn't realize how prestigious an internship at P&G even was back then. So all I said was, I'm here to learn. Just whatever broadening experiences you can give me, that's what I'm looking for. And I think that attitude has served me really well in my career. I wasn't as focused on a title. Even now, somebody asked me the other day, what's your goal? Do you want to be a CEO? And I was like, the funny thing is I'm 44. I've never thought that in my head. I want to be a CEO because it's not as important to me what the title is or how much I'm paid. As somebody was shocked a few years ago when I was transitioning companies, they asked me how much I was paid and I didn't know because my husband handles all of our finances. It's just not the things that are critical to me. I think what's more important is the chance to continue growing yourself and also finding the places where you can add value. Like for me, it's just that simple. So I was at P&G working I had great opportunities. I started in fabric care. I went to beauty care. I then went into healthcare. So I got to go across the business units.
Yeah.
In that period, I went to Arkansas and worked with Walmart at retail. I was in Guangzhou in the early 2000s working internationally. And so really P&G delivered on every different type of experience. It was sort of like a sampler platter for general management. And,
That's
I was
awesome.
really grateful to have taken some of those jobs that were sort of lateral. So I had the opportunity to go to SK2, a very sexy beauty brand that I love and still use today. And I ended up going instead to Arkansas and working with Walmart. And a lot of people thought I was crazy, but I really wanted to learn retail, similar to what Lingling was saying earlier. And I thought, I'd rather learn it when I'm a little bit more junior and I'm doing the day-to-day work because that makes you better as a leader when you are involved on the ground and you understand what it's like to be on the floor. So I went to Walmart and, I didn't know it, but that retail experience opened me up as a candidate for Apple later. They reached out to me. I had no idea. In fact, when I first got the recruiting email from Apple, I thought it was a hoax. They signed it with a little pink apple. And I'm like, I don't know anybody at Apple. They can't be recruiting me. But they were, and they were interested in the CPG mixed with retail background. And it was a great opportunity to take, what we were talking about earlier as well. CPG in many ways is two-dimensional. You have a product you're responsible for, and you're responsible for its distribution, for the packaging, for everything about it, for the advertising. But you don't always have the data that says, who's buying it? How well did it do? I can't say I want it on this spot in the shelf because those are decisions made by others. Even pricing is at the discretion of the retailer. So when I joined
Yeah.
Apple and went to retail, it's like 3 dimensions suddenly opened up. Now
Mm-hmm.
you have the store and it's your privilege where people are coming in to get to know your product and asking questions. You have all the data available to you, and you have the opportunity to create an experience with that customer.
Right.
And then when I was recruited over to IHG and had the opportunity to join hotels, it was never anything on my radar. I'd never thought to myself, wow, I'd love to be a hotelier. When you think about hospitality, you now go into 4 dimensions. If you have, three, now you add time because people are living and sharing and trusting you with their most intimate moments. They're getting married in your hotel. They're eating your food. They're trusting you not to poison them. They are trusting you with sleep, which is so important for their wellness. So that's what really drew me over to hospitality. And again, that's what drew me. But when I joined, I also realized this is not only a very traditional, very, very old industry, it's also e-commerce. Because everything's sold in the online space, and your ability to create a healthy business structure is reliant on your ability to sell in your own channels as well as your intermediary channels like online travel agencies. So I learned a ton about e-commerce, and actually, ironically, I think I learned more about the digital space at IHG than I did at Apple in many ways. And that's really what teed me up to join Starbucks. They were interested in somebody who had that hospitality experience, who also had retail, but also, grounded in CPG. So it unfolded because I went where I was passionate. You could never have designed a career plan this way. It kind of doesn't make sense, but everything that you get drawn to helps you, because if you're drawn to it, you're eager and you're curious and interested. And then if you find that you thrive there and you're joyful, then you'll be successful. And when you're successful, then the next thing opens up for you. That's sort of in a nutshell how I talk about the career over the last 21 years.
Wow, that's awesome. It's amazing to see how your learnings, your curiosity, and your passion really lead to a lot of amazing opportunities. So you grew up in the United States and you went to China for work while at P&G. So how did you make that decision to say yes, to take that assignment in a new country?
Well, my family's from China originally. And my parents had grown up in Taiwan. And so I'd always been interested to go to China. But, in 2002, we didn't probably globally know China was going to be what it is today.
Yeah.
And I think it was much harder. It was called a hardship position. I was given, extra cost of living adjustments so that we could go to Hong Kong and buy, milk and cheese and cereal. It was a very different job back then than what it is today. But I was interested to learn. And what an opportunity. Again, you lean into a new experience. That was pre-WeChat, pre-BAT by Alibaba, Tencent. It was, my Chinese was terrible back then. I thought I spoke Chinese, but it turns out all I knew how to say were things like, go make your bed, or it's time to eat dinner. The things that your parents say to you in the workplace, it turns out. But yeah, the chance to go out there and learn was irresistible to me. And again, it opened up a whole new career path for me later down the road.
Yeah. So China has a very large population with many different dialects and eating habits in very different cities. So what were the things you did to set yourself up for success and really get to know the consumers there, which is very, very critical as a marketer?
Yeah, I think, huge credit to Procter Gamble. This is such a good training ground for how to be a general manager and how to run a business. And one of the skills, it is a skill. I was consulting last night with one of the founders of Xiaomi, which is a technology company in China. We have mutual friends, and he said, I would just love your thoughts on how to think about our brand. So we talked for a couple of hours, and he had a really good comment, because I think a lot of people think of P&G as marketing, or they think about it as general management. He said, I think it's an insight company. And I thought, you're exactly right. Learning how to extract those meaningful insights, translate them into action, that's really what drives a business. So one thing I'm very grateful for is with P&G, we learned to live with consumers. I remember early on, we went to live with, second, third tier Chinese consumers. And the biggest thing you learn is what people tell you is not always what they do. So
Yeah.
you sit in a focus group room behind a two-way mirror and you eat M&Ms. I'm a huge skeptic of that kind of approach, right? Because
Hmm.
first of all, you're talking to 5 people. One person's going to lead the conversation. It's groupthink. They're telling you what they think you want to hear. They may have even screamed themselves in just to get the money. And so there's so many things flawed with it. But when you go into a consumer's home and when you live with them, then you see reality. I remember talking to somebody, and what you realize very early is, of course, you want to give your best self to people. So I asked her, what do you eat for dinner? And she said, oh, we're going to make mapo tofu. We're going to make all this really, really good food tonight. And I asked her, do you use shampoo and conditioner? She said, oh yeah, I always use shampoo and I always use conditioner. And conditioner is tough to use when you have to go to the well and it's freezing cold water and you're pumping, and then you have to do it twice just to condition your hair. But I was listening to her and kind of taking all my notes and thinking, wow, okay, so she's really aspirational and she's really kind of building up this nice life. And then this huge turtle waddles into the living area where we're talking. And then somebody comes running from the kitchen and she's shouting, our dinner's running away. And I was like, oh, so your fancy dinner, you're eating this turtle that's waddling across the floor.
That's so funny.
You want to pay respect to them and you don't say anything, but you realize that's what makes a good business person, somebody who is observant, who observes what's really happening and looks beyond what people are saying to you. So I learned a lot about China by living with consumers. And, it left such an impact with me that when we went back to China with Apple, as a family, we chose not to live in an expat compound. That's the norm, right? We chose to live in a local Chinese community. And, in some ways that's harder. I still remember my daughter was very young when we moved back to China. She was maybe like 2 years old. And there were these beautiful playgrounds all over and they're all filled with these gorgeous sandboxes. And I had her playing in it. We're building sandcastles. We're like, gosh, nobody plays in the sandboxes. This is amazing. Like it's a whole playground just for us. And then we realized that there are all these hundreds of stray cats and it was basically a huge litter box. But that's what you learn when you live in the community. And then you realize, gosh, there are some other problems with stray animals. And then you realize life is different. But when you live in an expat compound, you're never going to have that real experience. And I do believe that I think it made me better. It made me easier to relate to the people who worked for me, who were all local Chinese, but it made me better because I better understood the consumer that I was serving as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this experience with us. And while I'm asking Emily questions, I would also encourage each of you to ask Emily some questions you're curious about, because I want to make sure this lasts about myself, because I can ask her hours of questions, but I do want to make sure I'm giving you the opportunity here as well. So P&G, as you mentioned, is really considered the ultimate training ground for the best, not only brand managers, but also commercial leaders. Many CEOs come from P&G. But what are the learning opportunities and the marketing challenges specifically that lead you to Apple, InterContinental Hotel Group, and also Starbucks? If you can briefly share with us.
Yeah, I think I talked a little bit about the Walmart experience that opened up Apple later. Apple experience provided a chance to go turn around the IHG business. IHG's digital business opened up Starbucks. I think, the career kind of unfolded itself. One of the things I think that's really helpful about working for a big company like P&G, we heard some other big companies mentioned earlier, like MetLife. I think they're great. I didn't know it when I joined, but you can have such a long career learning so many different parts of the business and staying within one company, right? Because you realize when you change companies, you start over. You always take a step back because now you have to learn the new culture. You have to establish your credibility again. You have to learn the unspoken rules. All of that stuff is real and it takes time. And I realized I was able to really just kind of flow with 11 years that went so quickly because the roles continued to change. And of course, you're still learning, what it's like in Arkansas and the Walmart retail team versus working in Guangzhou. They're very different jobs, but fundamentally you're all working with the same company and there's a huge advantage there. And I think the other thing is you start learning about what works for you. I think oftentimes we are so focused, maybe as Asians, maybe as women, you know, even more so, we're so focused on, in some ways, proving ourselves. Like, I want my boss to know he made the right hire. I want them to know I'm going to work so hard. I'm going to deliver such good results. I'm a huge achiever. But at the end of the day, are we taking care of ourselves? And how do you know what type of a role, what kind of a company culture, and what kind of a boss enables you to thrive? So I think P&G also provided for me so many different experiences. I learned different industries. I learned different categories. I learned different company cultures and different types of bosses I got to work for, you know, over in the course of the next 10 years. And I think it kind of goes back to that first question in many ways. You have to learn what works for you, because that's where you're going to be fulfilled. It's how you define your success, you know? And for me, I think it helped me shape what I love. So for me, it's always been really simple. It's like mind, heart, and soul have to be fed. Mind is about, I've learned, I like stretching operational roles. I like being responsible for the business. That's probably coming from working at P&G, where you're responsible for the P&L, you know?
Yes.
You look at numbers and it's gotten in my head. I like that. For my heart, I've learned I love working with people. For me, I'm not an individual contributor. I'm probably not somebody working solo in an expertise field. For me, I like building teams, and I like nurturing people. So that kind of fills my heart. And then for soul, something that's important to me is as I developed from P&G to retail to hospitality, it really became about developing meaningful customer experiences. And again, you know, the spare room and what we do in our free time feeds other parts of my soul. And then I sit on the board of a nonprofit that feeds my soul. But I also think going to work and doing work that's meaningful to me feeds my soul. You know, I think there are a lot of jobs that we can all do, but what intellectually interests you, what allows you to kind of bring your heart to work and feel like you're doing something that helps people, and then what really brings purpose to your work every day.
Yeah, thank you. Since at P&G, you work across so many different categories. And I know as a brand manager, you always feel like the brand you have worked on feels like your baby, right? Because you touch it, you design the packaging. You know, what brand do you like the best out of all these brands you have worked at?
That I've worked on? Oh, gosh. Well, it definitely wasn't the cough cold category. Never talked about mucus so much. Hung out with sick people. You know, I would probably say, like, my heart is with Pantene. I still use it. And I think it was at that critical point in my own career, because it was my first brand manager job. I was working abroad. And then later when I went to Walmart, I was still responsible for beauty and health. So it included the hair care category, and just got to see that brand develop. I think you also feel a sense of pride when you're able to, for me, this is another question. It's like, what gives you that joy? I love turning businesses around or seeing them grow really quickly. And what I've realized is I'm not the captain of a steady ship. If you give me a very stable business and like I could have a great work-life balance and run the business, that's not probably what gives me the most joy. I like something that's challenging. I like something that requires extra effort to figure out what the potential is or how to unlock new growth. And for us and on Pantene those couple of years, we that's exactly what we did. So that gave me, I think, a level of satisfaction that then ties your emotion to that brand.
Yeah. I almost feel like we should do another talk just talking about your turnaround experience of that brand, because I remember when I was young, you know, Pantene is a very, very popular brand in China. Like everybody uses Pantene, including myself. Yeah. So I'm seeing some great questions here in our chat room. So Stephen, hi Stephen. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask Emily a question here? Love to hear your voice.
Lingling, good to see you. Emily, thanks so much for sharing your experiences and insights here. It's so wonderful. And Lingling, thanks so much for hosting this. So my question is just, you were speaking about your different experiences across industries and just a really exciting career path that you've had. I'm curious, as you've moved from company to company, different cultures, different organizations, in different industries, what approaches have you found successful in building new relationships with co-workers and other stakeholders as you're getting to know them and gaining gaining some traction within your organizations?
That's an awesome question. The best advice I got was a gentleman who invited me to that Pantene roll in Guangzhou. He was actually really tough on me. We're still in touch. And he's just invited me to his son's wedding, actually. He's incredible. One of the real inspirations in my life, because he invited me over. I took the role, and then his first reaction was, "Great, I'm glad you're taking it. Just so you know, as an expat, you cost 3 times the cost of a local, so I expect 3 times the amount of work." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Just so you know," every time he led with "just so you know," I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna get it now." Something like very painful to my pride is about to follow. He said, "Just so you know, I'm bringing you in because you have this energy and this passion, and I need that for this Pantene business. However, you are entering a culture you don't understand. You've never worked in China. You're leading people for the first time." So he said, "I want you to enter softly." And that phrase has always resonated with me. And I am not an enter softly kind of person. Like, I come in and pop the champagne and I'm already like, dancing or singing. That's just who I am. And so entering softly, but doing it in an authentic way is something I think I'm still learning. Mm-hmm. So every job I've had, I try to enter softly. That means to me, listening. It means asking a lot of questions, but even I found as you become more senior, questions are inevitably seen as challenge. And that's something I've learned. Mm-hmm. I ask a lot of questions because I'm curious, but questions are always taken on the defensive. And so I've also learned to enter softly and seek to learn without coming across like I'm challenging, because that puts up walls as well. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other thing that helps a lot, Stephen, is finding somebody inside who can be sort of like a mentor, somebody you trust early on. Because I think somebody who will tell you the truth is incredibly rare. Truly, it's very rare. But if you can find somebody who would tell you where you're falling down or what people are really saying, or, people tell you they're so happy you're here, but they hate that you're here, or luckily that didn't happen to me, but those things can all happen, and you're a fish in a new ocean that you don't understand. So somebody who can help you navigate, even while you're sort of trying to keep yourself kind of toned down, listening and learning, is really helpful.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah. And thank you, Stephen, for asking the question. So I'm seeing Rose here has another question. Hi, Rose. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, and I'm going to preface this question with a little bit. I love what you just spoke about, because I think a lot of the career choices that you made is following a little bit what I'm doing, and I definitely had some friends and family who gasped at some of my choices in my career path. So first, thank you for that, because that gives me a boost of confidence that I actually, might be doing the right thing. My company is also really proactive about reaching out to us and wanting to have us talk about career roadmaps. Like, what do we want to do and where do we want to go outside of the company that we're working with, and how can they help us get there? And it was really funny because none of the other companies that I've worked at prior, this was part of the process. So one, I was really, it was a really positive thing to see that. Yeah. But at the same time, I was completely stumped. I'm like, I don't know what I want in like 3 to 5 years. Like I don't know. Should I just put in a marketing manager? So, and I also noticed working on teams that like there's people who like actively go out to, the unknown and bring it in. And I guess I don't know how to do that. So my question is, how do you add value to each of the role that you take on? Do you actively search for value you can add, or do you follow sort of like the path and goals that are set for you? And if you are the former versus the latter, what are sort of like proactively, like how do you go about bringing these kind of challenges or things that you're curious about like to fruition successfully?
Great question. I'll start off with I rarely recommend business books. Like I think this is all I have amongst like a library of lots and lots of books, because I just think generally everything can be written in 2 to 3 pages. But I really like the book First 90 Days. And I've always used that framework. The reason is I think it helps you identify what are the right questions I should be asking up front, and don't lose sight of it as you start getting immersed. Who are the right people I want to be engaging with? And don't lose sight of that when certain people want time, and you may, you know, if you just go with the flow, you're going to miss the opportunity to engage with the breadth of people that you might want to. And I think importantly, what are the quicker wins? So as you start getting immersed in a new job, you're listening, you know, to the conversation with Stephen just now, but then you're also starting to identify like, oh, I think we could really make some quick progress on this thing. And you might identify longer term, I see a bigger opportunity here. Let's start paving the way. So my mind always works in lines in a lot of ways. Like, okay, so this path goes from here to here. Here's about how long it probably should take. Here's a much longer path. But if I don't start laying the groundwork for it, I'll never get there. So I like the first 90 days. And I've always kind of created that chart and then continue to expand it as I stay in the job. So it becomes, you know, 30, 60, 90, then it becomes 6 months, then it's 1 year. And I think that helps a lot because it keeps sight of the shorter term and the longer term. And it helps you think through, like, what have I delivered? Did I do what I said I was going to do? And if I didn't, how do I go back? There's always a chance to correct that. It links to another idea that I feel really strong about, which is writing your So your epitaph is what's written on your gravestone when you die. But if you've ever left a role for another role, especially within a company, because that's where it's probably the most positive, you know, people have a big party for you and they'll give you maybe some tchotchkes or a caricature of yourself, right? We've all gotten those types of things. But at that party, what do people say? They'll say, oh, you know, we're so glad Rose was on this role for 2 or 3 years. Here's what she delivered. So what I always try to do when I go into a job, I physically write out what they would say about me at the end of this role. So at the end, like I remember my most recent one was at Starbucks China. Said at the end of this role, Emily took a team that had largely turned over and built a strong foundation of people who are thriving in their jobs. That was the first line because that's really important to my heart. Then she helped launch the roastery, the first roastery outside of Pike Place in Shanghai. Her team stood up the delivery business for Starbucks Delivers and doubled the digital contribution through their ecosystem. I think that was roughly my goal. So it has people, it has intellectual goals, it has tangibles, but it also has numbers and some intangibles. I think writing out what you want to be known for at the end, like, and also have some grace with yourself. You're not going to hit 100% of it, but having that end goal in mind helps you when you lay out those paths, whether they're short-term or long-term, think through, like, are these focused on the right thing?
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's also very, very helpful for some of our assignment students here who are about to start their internships, right? And reading the first 90 books is really, really helpful. I almost reread it for every single new job that I took on as well. Cool. Thank you so much, Rose, for asking your question. So, Emily, your personal website is called Social Legacy, and I think some of the participants also went to your website earlier. And you have a very touching, you know, TED Talk called The Spare Room. Can you share with us the story behind the spare room and how you came to this term, social legacy?
Yeah, well, it's a book I've always thought about writing. Well, not always, maybe in the last 2 or 3 years. So it started when I was just 20 years old. And I think it wasn't even out of a philanthropic heart. I just saw this little girl who looked a lot like myself, who was hurt on the side of the street, and just thought I would help her and offered to buy her dinner. And then as I saw her walking out into the street, I couldn't imagine her going back out there all beaten up, and didn't even know her story, but she was so little. You know, she was a 14-year-old Korean girl, but she, you know, Asians look young, thankfully, but she looked like 8 or 9. And so I just said, you know, you need a place to stay. You can crash at my place for a night. And then that turned into like a week, and then it turned into a month. And she ended up living with me for a couple of months, and I got to learn her story, which was a huge privilege. And you realize, like, it sounds like a lot to bring in a teenage runaway who had been prostituting herself on the street to live with you for many months. That sounds huge. But I started to realize, like, one little step goes into the next little step, and actually it costs you nothing at all. And you only gain tremendously from the experience. And so I don't, you know, whether it's because I was open to it, or whether it's because there is just that much need. Everywhere we've lived in the US and China, we have had these kids showing up, sometimes like literally on our doorstep. Sometimes complete strangers will stop us in the street and say, would you do such and such? And we have had 16 kids over the last 21 years. And the more kids we had, the more our family. So it started when I was single, then when we were a young couple, my husband and I, then when we were a young family. And now, you know, my daughter is 11, and whenever we are looking at housing, the first thing we say is there a spare room? Because we know that somebody's going to come live in our home. And whoever shows up, the last girl who came to live with us was arguably the most extreme circumstance. And I realized nothing's going to scare me away anymore, because I realized, you know, that's where this phrase came from. This is our social legacy. All those years ago when I was enrolled in medical school and realized I don't have the distance to be an actual doctor for hurt children, but I can help them even if it's, you know, one at a time. And I don't know, there's a deeper purpose to why we exist as individuals and as a family unit. But it's a thought of like, what is the legacy you leave behind in society? And whether that society is like the social world and digital, or whether it is the community in which you live, I think everybody does serve that purpose. And it's been really interesting as I've kind of figured out my own philosophy around the social legacy. I did a TEDx talk, and then the book has kind of come out of that. I've realized it is the time for the business world to think about these questions, because a lot of these books are written from a charity or philanthropy standpoint. But actually, if you follow the Business Roundtable in August of 2019, you know, 100 plus CEOs came out and said, we cannot follow this old model. We are not after profit alone. Businesses have to serve a deeper purpose, and brands have to have meaning. And that's been a very hot topic in many publications, right? But how do you lead a brand toward a purposeful objective if you as a leader are not a purposeful leader? So for me, it's a really good time to be talking about what is your social legacy? How does it intersect with work? And how do you think about being authentic to who you are, how that impacts what you leave on society, but also how it helps shape who you are as a business leader?
Wow, it's definitely very, very touching. And I encourage all of you to, watch that TED Talk given by Emily. So I think a lot of us here are probably in our 20s or maybe early 30s. What's your advice for us who also want to build a personal purpose statement and then really think about our own social legacy? What are the little steps that we can take?
Well, later read the book, because now that it's going to be written as like, you know, every chapter is going to have an exercise at the end to help you think about it. So the goal is everybody who reads the book will actually be able to answer that question. So your question is something that has really inspired me in terms of how we're defining it. But in the meantime, I think it's interesting when we talk about business strategy. How many strategies have you read that really, after you read it maybe 2 or 3 times, you're like, I still don't really know what the business is choosing to do? Strategy has to be deliberate decisions on the things that you will do and you won't do. Right? The won't is hard because it's so easy for strategy to want to be everything to everyone. But it's the same thing for who you are as a human. It's equally important to understand who you are and who you aren't, what you love to do and what you don't love to do. And I'd say, I remember one of my last roles at P&G, I had the opportunity to work in upstream design, front-end innovation. And I really wanted that experience because I'd never worked that far upstream. And it was a major moment for me, pivotably, because I suddenly realized I don't really like this. And, you know, I never felt okay saying I don't like something because it's a privilege, it's an opportunity, I should do my best, I should love my job all the time. And then you realize, you know what, it's okay. You still give it your best, but you realize that that's not the work you love to do as much. So I think starting with your personal purpose, you have to kind of know who you are and what choices you want to make to lean into the things that give you joy and help you thrive and grow as a person, and then the things that you don't. And I think part of that is getting very comfortable with yourself, and that's something that is tough for people. You know, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown as well, because it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to recognize the things about yourself that you think are kind of ugly, or think about the times where you failed or didn't operate the way that you would have expected yourself to, and then how much do you beat yourself up over that? And that, you know, that kind of like self-flagellation turns into a shield against yourself. Like you end up protecting yourself from yourself, and you end up creating these sort of walls. And then at the end of it, you're you're in a self-protection mode versus a sort of self-realization mode. And I think that self-protectionism is tough because you're not leaning into who you could be, but you also find that you take sort of retaliatory action around the people, you know, the people who are close to you. So thinking about who you are and who you aren't, being really kind of vulnerable with yourself and saying, here's what I like about myself and here's what I don't and what I want to do about it. And then I used to do this sort of defining your personal brand training at the last couple of companies I worked. And I think it's also important to lay all this stuff down, but then ask 5 people who are really close to you in a professional setting and a personal setting, because a lot of times you might think one thing, but other people's perception is a very, very different thing. I'll share one of my most shocking moments. The first time I did a personal brand training, I wasn't leading it. I was participating at P&G. And the question was, I think it was like, what celebrity are you most like? And it was not intended to be a very deep question, right? I can't remember what I said about myself, but you go around the table and you hear what people think about you. And somebody said that the celebrity I reminded them most of was Jack Nicholson. I was like, what the hell? That's terrifying, you know? Because that's what they saw. They saw like this super powerful presence that was intimidating, and I would never have seen myself that way. Never. I see myself as like vulnerable. There are things I'm not good at. But actually, the perception on the other end was so different that really left a deep impression with me. And I think it's really important, if we want to think about defining who we are, what is our personal purpose, what do we want to stand for, to always do that pulse check and understand how other people are seeing you. And where there's that disconnect, it's totally okay. It's weird if there isn't one, but then just understanding, okay, well, is that okay? Maybe it's more positive, right? Or is it not okay? Like for me, I don't want to be Jack Nicholson. So I need to change about who I am and how I come across without losing the essence of, you know, myself. I think those things are really important. And then I think the last thing is a trajectory of what you are seen as today versus what you want to be in the future. So for every role, like I said, to Rose's question, you can think about how you want to be remembered in that role. What is your epitaph? I think it's also equally important in life to think about the same thing. What is your life purpose? How would you simply write that down? And what is your life goal? And like when you do pass away, what would people say about you? What do you want them to say?
Wow. Actually, a follow-up question I have, you know, regarding the previous question is, we can be very candidly and we can about ourselves when we write things down, but how do we be very authentic with our bosses? You know, in performance reviews, do you actually say, I don't really enjoy that work? So do you actually say, okay, I want more of that work to get trained so that I can be better? Or do we actually say, actually, I don't really enjoy that. Like, I'd love more tasks in other areas that I do enjoy and I'm actually good at?
I think, well, my first answer is going to be super pragmatic because I'm a practical person. It depends on the boss, right? There are some people I worked for that I would absolutely have been more honest, because I believe that person is out for my best interest and they care about me. And therefore, my response is going to be, I know you care about me, so how can I help you help me? There are other people I've worked for who don't care about me. And what they care more about is that I'm useful to them. And so in that case, I would definitely not tell them, I don't love this work, right? So you have to be discerning about who you're speaking to. But then the second thing I'd say is it depends on how you say it as well. So let's say that my boss does care about me and I wanted to stay at P&G another 20 years. And I wanted them to know that this upstream design work is not my joy. What I would say is, I'm so appreciative of having had so many different experiences. And as I've had the breadth of these experiences, I realize I can do them. And I always love the company I work at, but where I thrive the most is where I'm responsible for results. That's just who I am. And so moving forward, I'd love to consider areas of opportunity or even special assignments where I can get more back into the operations of the role. So it's not, I would probably never articulate it as I don't like this work, but it's what do I find I do best, and always thinking about the other person. Where do I add the most value? Because that's where they're going to benefit the most.
Yeah, actually, I saw a comment here from Rose saying, great question. How do you get with your boss? Haha.
It depends on the boss. And I feel like I was super, super privileged. Early on, I worked for people who were good-hearted. who wanted my best interest. And I realized that's a luxury. That is not a given. I've had a great example of who I want to be as a boss and who I don't want to be as a boss. And I think all of those experiences can kind of you take from it what you will to figure out who you want to be, and also very importantly, who you want to work for. You know, so I took this break because I want to write this book, and I wanted to give my daughter a chance to be an American in America and all of that cool stuff. But I've been waiting on where I want to go back, because there's so many options. But it's really important to me to think about what is that role that feeds my mind and my heart and my soul. And also, this is probably the first time, look, I'm like 44, and it's the first time I have been equally interrogating the company and the manager. It takes a lot of self-comfort, like knowing who I am, that's not the right phrase, comfort in who I am, to be a little bit pushy. And I've been asking questions like, tell me about a time you've had to fire somebody. How did you handle that? Or like, tell me about the last time that you had an offsite. What was that like? Oh, really? You haven't had one for a year? Why not? I mean, those things are important because I want to know those things about who I work for before I join. But I will be honest, it took me a long time to get comfortable with asking those questions, instead of spending the entire time trying to prove why I'm the right person for the job.
Yeah. So speaking of bosses, did you have any sponsors and mentors along your career journey, and what were their impacts on your career trajectory?
I think that's really important. So I think having a mentor is always really important. Ideally, somebody who is probably, it doesn't even matter the level, really. I've had reverse mentors who are younger and super helpful. I've had peer mentors and mentors who are sort of like hierarchically above me. And I think the goal for a mentor is somebody who is not impacting your assessment, who is not responsible for your rating, who truly can listen to you unadulterated and give you honest advice. You need that. That is your real sounding board. And I think it's tough. You know, at one point, my husband worked at P&G as well. And so even though he knows the culture, he knows the context, it's still tough to find somebody who gives you that mentorship. So finding a mentor, I think, is really important. I also think finding a sponsor is important, and that's somebody who's different. Now that is somebody who's looking out for your career. That's somebody who chooses to invest in you because they see your potential, and they benefit when you thrive because it makes them look good, and they made the right choice in investing in you, right? So I think you need both. And the person who comes to mind for me is Vivian. She was, I reached out as a mentor initially. And because I was quite naive, I was very unadulterated in how I reached out to her. I told her all my ugly stuff and like, oh, I'm really struggling with this and I don't know what I want to do. And, you know, I was pre-med until now. And she had enough grace and saw enough potential in me that she kind of went along for the ride. And what happened was she became my sponsor, because she was probably 2 levels up from me at P&G when I was very young in my career. And I had an incredible opportunity where she was a sponsor, but I still treated her like a mentor. So she saw all my ugliness and all of my questions and insecurities, and yet she still sponsored me. And that is like the nirvana. I don't expect, you know, most people can find something like that, because she would speak truth to me, tell me where she should criticize me, you know, where she thought I wasn't doing good enough or thinking about things the right way, but she always had my back. And, you know, it was the kind of deep relationship where I got to meet her husband, and he became a sponsor. They're like a buy one, get one free deal. They're amazing. And, you know, it got to the point where we became life friends, and I would still consider, they're the first people I call when I need career advice. Right now I was considering an option I'm just about to finalize. And the first people I call is them 20 years later. And they're actually the godparents of my daughter, is how close we are.
Wow.
I think when you find those people who believe in you, hang on to them, because if they're willing to invest in you, you know, it's a huge gift. And then I spend my time thinking, how do I pay that back? How do I help them? How can I add value to them as well? I remember one guy, his name was Alex. He stopped me in the hallway at P&G a couple of years later. He was like, hey, how are you doing? Do you need help with anything? And immediately I had this very childish reaction of like, no, I don't need help. Like, why would I admit to this person I don't even know that I need help? And I totally missed it, because this guy was basically saying, I've seen your work. I think you're good. I'm volunteering, right, to help you. And I was the idiot who was like, oh no, I'm good, thanks. totally missed that opportunity. And I always think back on it. In fact, I reached out to him probably 15 years later and I was like, hey, Alex, remember me? Just wanted to say thank you for offering. I just didn't understand. So if somebody reaches out and says, do you want to get together? Or, hey, how are you doing? Do you need any help? The answer is always yes. The answer is always like, they're reaching out. I've done that now. And, as I get older, I've reached out to others and said, hey, I just really like what you're doing. I think that's great. Is there something that I can be doing to help you? And I get the same reactions. Some people are like, yes, this is great. And maybe they cling a little too tightly sometimes. And they're like, how about every week for lunch? And you're like, whoa. But then you also get the other side, which is, no, I'm okay, thanks. And you think, okay, let me try to figure out how to articulate that so they understand. I believe in them. I see potential and I want to help them.
Well, thank you for sharing your personal stories with us, Emily. And yeah, it's so funny where you mentioned about the difference between sponsors and mentors, because they are different. But I agree with you. Mentors are and then sponsors are very, very important in our careers. And never be afraid to ask for help, because I sometimes feel like, oh, that's a very weak sign of me needing help. But in reality, everybody needs help. So we only have 4 minutes left. Time flies so fast. My final question for you, Emily, is our community consists of women with high aspirations. What advice do you have for us who want to achieve great things in our lives? And you mentioned about having a purpose.
Yeah.
Are there any other things you'd love to share with us?
Yeah. So if you've ever done, is it Myers-Briggs? Or Strength Finders.
Strength Finders. Mm-hmm.
My number one strength is achievement.
Me too.
I have to say it's a risk. And the reason is you get so driven, you get so task-oriented, you get so end-goal focused that sometimes you miss the softer stuff. You miss taking care of yourself. You miss people. You lose the opportunity to extend generosity of spirit, because you're so busy. I look back, this writing period has really been about the book, but what's amazing is it gives me a lot of introspective time because I'm thinking about stories in the past, and I've realized, gosh, I have made so many mistakes. I have treated people in ways I didn't even know was disrespectful. Like, here's an example. Right now, I'm saying yes. So when you reached out, I thought, oh, I have time. I'm gonna make time for people who are interested to learn. And if I can add value, that's part of my life purpose. That's what I've defined for myself, which is to help people thrive. Mm-hmm. But how many times when I was busy and I had built my schedule to the minute, like I would give myself a 2-minute bathroom break between meetings, like that's it. Mm-hmm. And somebody stops you in the hallway. You're like, oh yeah, find my admin and we can schedule something. Or a friend who reached out and wanted to get together, and I sent them to my admin because my admin knew my calendar better than me. And for me, in that moment, that was practical. But looking back, I'm like, that was stone cold, man. Like who reaches out to a friend and then the friend's like, oh, check in with my admin. I have time in 3 weeks. But that's kind of who I had become because I was so achievement oriented. As I get ready to go back to work, I'm really kind of making this commitment to myself that I don't want to be like that again. Like I think being a human is so important. We can still be high achievers, but we can't lose sight of the people around us and the impact that we're having. And I think the last thing is when you think about your end goal, sometimes you're so goal focused, you forget the journey. And there's so many moments in journeys that I look back that I think I could have enjoyed that so much more. Or I had this really cool relationship with someone I worked with, and then I moved on to the next job. And then I kind of there's this woman, Isabel. We're still on Facebook, but I'm not really connected with her. I'll tell you, she was R&D when I was marketing, brand management. And like every Christmas, she would disappear for a long time. She took all her vacation. I was like, what are you doing over the holidays? She was building a Christmas tree farm. And I was like, wow. What? That's so quirky and interesting. And I've always thought about her. Like I reached out maybe 2 years ago and I was like, hey, your trees are probably grown up, because that's how long it takes to, have a Christmas tree farm. And I just thought, yeah, what a miss to have lost touch with people just because I was achievement driven. I moved on to the next job. I focus on the next thing. And, you don't mean to, but you leave people behind and you miss out on so much richness in relationships.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. And I definitely really resonate what you said, because I definitely feel like sometimes when we are probably earlier in our career, we tend to focus on how many years we're going to spend in one level. When can we get to the next level? Oh, my friend is already a director. Why am I still a manager? I think sometimes we tend to spend too much time thinking about those things versus actually learning and, spend the time to build the relationships.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again for sharing your time and the wisdom with us. And then everyone, if you can unmute yourself, let's give Emily a virtual clap.
Thanks. You guys can find me on LinkedIn. I was just going to type it in, but you already have it. You can find me on the website. If you have any other questions or there's anything I can do for you, just let me know.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And you can still follow Aspirational Women on Facebook. Yeah, if you like the session, I would really appreciate a like or a follow with us. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
So nice to meet you guys. Oh, I love these chats. I'll read them. Take care. Good to meet you all.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good job, Lingling. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Yeah, how do you like it?
It's very fun. I like the community. I like the way you structured it. So I hope it was useful.
Yeah, it's super useful. And I'm going to probably edit the recording a little bit and probably upload it on YouTube, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, and then probably we'll also write a blog post just to kind of summarize some of the key lessons you share with us.
Sounds good. Happy
Yeah.
to.
Okay.
Stay connected, okay?
Yeah, please. Definitely. I think you're going to share it probably on LinkedIn when the book is released.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in July, right?
It won't be released. That's when the manuscript is done. Then you need the book cover. So it'll probably launch in spring.
Okay. Okay. I am looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, when I travel to Seattle when this is all over, yeah, I'm going to reach out to you and see if we can meet in person.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great night.
You too.